Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Mastering difficult conversation is an important consideration. Difficult conversation, by their very definition, are, difficult. Whether we're talking about conversations in your personal life or those at work, it is in everybody's best interest to have some kind of skill, preferably mastery, of having such conversations. Leaving them unresolved or having them go awry is never a good idea and usually not helpful. Let's talk about difficult conversations at work. They are inevitable. They are bound to happen, whether these are conversations between colleagues or between a manager and a team member. Chances are that a difficult conversation will happen at least once, but more realistically, much more than once in your work career. One of the more obvious reasons for a difficult conversation may be simply conflict. This is something that could happen between colleagues. It could also happen between a manager and a team member. Conflict resolution is a big deal, specifically successful and beneficial conflict resolution. We don't want the kind of conflict resolution, or what one may mislabel as conflict resolution, that leads to more conflict and doesn't really resolve anything. Another reason for difficult conversations at work may be something such as feedback. Giving and receiving feedback can be difficult for both parties, whether we're talking manager and team member or colleague to colleague. Feedback is a real part of the workplace experience, and sometimes giving and receiving feedback can be difficult. And while performance issues, or specifically addressing them, is an important part of the workplace experience, it's not difficult to realize that sometimes those conversations can be less than pleasant and even difficult. Knowing all that, the next question is, how do we best address such conversations? When it comes to difficult conversations at work, it is absolutely in everybody's best interest, and it is absolutely up to every individual, regardless of their position or level of responsibilities at work, to learn the type of skills that will allow you to handle difficult conversations well. And of course, the end goal should be mastery of such conversations. While it's important to have a certain level of skills when it comes to having those difficult conversations, learning how to master having those conversations can really take you far, not only in the workplace, in your current situation, in your current job, but over the span of your entire working career. And of course, all of these skills, such mastery, will translate outside of the workplace and in your personal life as well. One of the biggest considerations when we think about difficult conversations and learning the proper skills to be effective at having difficult conversations, and even much more so when we are aiming to master difficult conversations, is emotional regulation. Difficult conversations can already be filled with emotions, and if these are not out in the open, if these are not overtly obvious, they may very well be the underlying or the undercurrent of the experience. Therefore, everybody has the responsibility of mastering their own emotions first and foremost. Difficult conversations are difficult enough. We don't need to add too much emotion or emotional outbursts into the equation. So, as you strive to improve your mastery of difficult conversations, the first order of business is mastering your emotions. That may mean stepping away, stepping back, sleeping on it, doing whatever you have to do in order to get your emotions in control, to get them in check before you have that conversation. If you can't trust yourself to control your emotions, that is not the time to have that difficult conversation. The other thing to consider when we discuss difficult conversations, and specifically mastering having such conversations, is the art of active listening. All too often, people get caught up in thinking about what they will say next or how they will respond to someone, or maybe they're even flat out interrupting when the other party says something that may feel like it requires an immediate response. Active listening can be just what you need in order for everybody to speak their piece, to feel heard, and to actually arrive at some kind of agreement or a resolution. Part of active listening, of course, is allowing the other person to have their turn and to speak. But the other part is to make sure that once the other person has said what they want to say, you clarify that what you heard is what they intended for you to understand. This is a big part of active listening, clarifying that you understood what was being conveyed to you. And of course, if you didn't get the message the first time, ask for clarification. This is all part of active listening. When it comes to difficult conversations, whether we're talking about conflict resolution or feedback or performance reviews, it's important to have an end goal in mind. Ideally, this would be a goal that is shared by everyone involved, but at the very least, as an individual, you should have a goal. It's also a good idea to share that goal with the other person or persons and to make sure that everybody's on the same page. There's no point of having difficult conversations if the outcome that everybody is seeking is not the same, or at the very least quite similar. As you remember, I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that having these difficult conversations and specifically mastering them is everybody's responsibility. But when it comes to this topic of conversation, there is a special role that leadership plays. Specifically, leaders absolutely have to lead by example. Managers must be able to demonstrate mastery of difficult conversations before they can expect their team members to learn and follow suit. And while difficult conversations, by their very definition, are difficult, it will behoove any organization to seek some formal training for everyone within the company in terms of addressing conflict, feedback, and performance, and more specifically, those difficult conversations. Whether that means training for active listening or emotional regulation, all of such trainings can be very helpful to mastering having those difficult conversations in ways that will allow everybody to come out on top. As a final note, I'd like to underline the importance of open communications within the workplace, and beyond that, the idea of empathy for one another. It's so easy to get caught up in deadlines or being right or worrying about our own career or our own advancement or our own performance. But in reality, we're all in this together. We come together within an organization to achieve a goal, a greater goal, which is all the more reason why it benefits everyone to master having difficult conversations in a successful way. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Difficult conversations are inevitable, whether that's in our personal lives or our experiences at the workplace. Some of the more common causes or reasons for difficult conversations can be things as plain as conflict, or maybe feedback, or performance reviews, or addressing performance. And while there is a special role for leaders to lead by example, it is absolutely everybody's responsibility to attempt to learn how to best have difficult conversations, and of course, the end goal being mastering such conversations. Emotional regulation, active listening, and having clear goals are key components of mastering difficult conversations. And as I already mentioned, modeling desired behavior is key. Open communications and a sense of empathy for one another are critical when it comes to being able to successfully have difficult conversations at the workplace. Remember that just because we're talking about the workplace and professional interactions, empathy still applies. As the week unfolds, I encourage you to consider your skill level in terms of how well you handle difficult conversations. Whether you have these conversations on a regular basis or they are more rare in your experience, it behooves everybody to master having difficult conversations such that it allows for conflict resolution, better feedback, and better performance. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. In addition to the podcast, you can also find videos pertaining to a comprehensive approach to stress management. So, check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G. The link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.